Hi, I'm Sara.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sara, what movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Spartacus, written by our beloved Dalton Trumbo and starring Kirk Douglas.
I am so excited that we get to talk about Spartacus.
Me too. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of crucifixion, slavery, violence, death, rapiness, war, human trafficking, ankle biting, callousness regarding the worth of human life, and copious, gratuitous views of men's muscular butts. Sara, can you think of anything that I may have left out?
Nope, sure can't. And Rena, can you please give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning! We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Amazing. Some of the sources we used in this episode include The Storm Before the Storm, The Beginning of the End of the Roman Republic by Mike Duncan, Rubicon, The Last Years of the Roman Republic by Tom Holland, Spartacus and the Slave Wars, A Brief History with Documents, translated, edited, and with an introduction by Brent D. Shaw, and Crassus, The First Tycoon by Peter Ustinov. And Rena, can you please tell us a little bit about Spartacus?
One of the issues with Spartacus as a biopic is that we don't know a heck of a lot about Spartacus, and that the script was not directly based on history, but on a novel by Howard Fast, a Hollywood Blacklist victim with his own particular political axe to grind. I was able to find roughly 30 pages of contemporary sources on Spartacus. And by contemporary, I mean written by people we would define as ancient Romans, and by ancient Romans, I mean sources spread out over about a 500-year period, out of which a fraction were authored by people who were alive at the same time as anyone portrayed in the movie Spartacus. So here's where I could find relative agreement. Spartacus was a slave. He was from Thrace, which overlapped present-day Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. In 73 BC, he broke out of a gladiatorial training school owned by Lentulus Batiatus, along with somewhere between 60 and the frequently cited 74 other gladiators. They rebelled. Their rebellion lasted for 2 years, but it failed. Crassus, an oligarch with an army, went after Spartacus. Crassus sucked. Spartacus was either killed in battle or crucified, but it was also reported that his body was never found. His rebellion was not the first time that slaves rebelled, and is referred to in history as the Third Servile War. One writer does mention him having a wife, whose story sounds nothing like the one given to the Gene Simmons character. Sara, can you please tell us a little bit about the movie Spartacus?
Spartacus is a 1960 American epic historical drama. It's directed by Stanley Kubrick, and it is the only time he worked with a production that he wasn't running, and he was super unhappy about that. It stars Kirk Douglas in the title role. It was adapted, as mentioned, by our beloved Dalton Trumbo from Howard Fast's novel. Also stars Laurence, Olivier, Charles Laughton. Welcome back to the show, Charles. Peter Ustinov, John Gavin, and Gene Simmons, who you mentioned. And also Tony Curtis, who I will argue is the Jared Leto of his time, because he's got blue eyes and wants to be a rock star. Film was a big hit. Budget was $12 million and box office was $60 million. It is recognized as the movie that ended the Blacklist, but we'll have a bit more discussion about that as we go on as well.
And we have some intense awards talk this week.
So 1961 was a pretty stacked year for the Academy Awards. The Apartment swept Billy Wilder's movie, which is a very good movie. I have no complaints about this, but this movie was snubbed by the Academy.
The Apartment was one of the rare times in Oscar history that the movie that won was actually the movie that won. Most Academy Awards are given to a director, producer, or actor for previous work that they were snubbed on in an endless cycle of zero hindsight. And The Apartment is pretty darn perfect. I'm
not going to fight you on the goodness of The Apartment. I will say, however, that this movie was not nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, which is surprising given its success, but also not surprising when you think about some of the headwinds that came up against Spartacus when it came out because of its role in being a symbolic end to the Blacklist because of the use of Dalton Trumbo's name on a sole story credit. And it is overtly proletariat.
John Wayne, and once again, all roads lead back to the Conqueror. He made a terrible Alamo movie that year.
Yes.
And a supporting actor in that, thank God, lost to Peter Ustinov in a rare case of justice.
That about covers it is that John Wayne was vocally out about how he hated this movie. So was Hedda Hopper, who is put a pin in her. We'll be dealing with her in the Trumbo episode in terms of a straight up villain in Hollywood in the 1950s. But there were definitely some people who didn't really appreciate the message of this film or what it came to represent in terms of ending this era that is incredibly shameful in Hollywood in terms of the House Un-Americans Activity Committee and Joe McCarthy and Roy Khan. But all that said, the movie won Best Picture and got a nomination for Kubrick at the Golden Globes. Woody Strode, who played the trainer, was nominated for Best Supporting Actor in this, as well as Ustinov at the Golden Globes. So it's as seismic as any solidly good movie winning Best Drama at the Golden Globes and then not getting even a nomination in those categories at the Oscars. So it is an oversight. It feels deliberate.
Also on the list of nominated pictures, Elmer Gantry's Sons and Lovers, The Sundowners.
I would say that the rest of the movies on that list, you're kind of left with no choice but to give it to The Apartment. One other notable snub is Alfred Hitchcock was nominated for Best Director at the Oscars, but the movie was not nominated.
That's a standard thing of lack of appreciation for
horror.
Another reason why I support giving it to The Apartment, because comedies never win.
I don't disagree with the principle of it. I'm just saying that there was room for Spartacus, which is a far more memorable movie, somewhere on that list. Any of those other movies could have come up. There was room on the table for Stanley Kubrick and Kirk Douglas that year that was deliberately not made. Another one is Otto Preminger's Exodus. Probably could have benefited from a few more nominations. It did get Best Supporting Actor nomination for Sal Mineo.
Exodus is an amazing film. Let's get into this episode.
So the movie opens with a couple of elements that I really appreciated. There's an overture that opens with a picture of Kirk Douglas looking beaten as a slave, which it's a jarring opening visual. And then it also has an intermission and then an Act 2 ease you back in score. And I wish we would do that. I came from seeing Wicked a couple weeks ago, and people were showing up at that theater with sleeping bags and Snuggies and stuff because they knew they were going to be sitting there for over 3 hours with the previews. And I said, this is too much for me. I was grateful for the civility of the intermission and the musical warning that the movie was starting. As a child of the 90s who loved the movie Clueless, I keep wanting to call him Spartacus because that is what Cher Horowitz called this film. And I am quite afraid I'm going to call him that many times during this recording. But we open, he is a slave and his life looks horrible and miserable, as slavery often does. The narrator mentions that Spartacus will not see the end of slavery. It won't come until 2,000 years later. And I'd like a word with that narrator because I don't know if they've heard about the construction of the World Cup Stadium.
Ooh.
But I'm pretty sure slavery is still quite alive and well in this world, depending on how you look at it.
There's a mention of Jesus somewhere in here, but they don't think, oh, I was born in a year number higher than the one I'm dying in because we're waiting for Jesus to get born and we're living in 74 BC. The Romans counted time from the founding of the city.
As I mentioned, Kubrick did not have creative control over this movie. He was brought in as a replacement by Kirk Douglas. Anthony Mann, who was known for more conventional Westerns and things with big battles, was originally brought in to be the director and was fired pretty quickly because Kirk Douglas didn't like working with him. The vision wasn't coming together. And Kirk Douglas had worked with Stanley Kubrick on Paths of Glory. He came in and took over an existing production. It shows that this isn't a Stanley Kubrick movie. There's touches that are very much him, but it's really interesting to watch it and see someone who was defined by certain ways of working, like having that reined in by a studio system. And I, hot take, actually love to see this happen. I love to see a director work within a system and be successful, even if it makes them unhappy, because everything can't all be like exactly the way you want it in this world.
The studio systems are often good for trimming out the most esoteric and self-aggrandizing excesses of the auteur.
Yep. We open on a scene of watching Peter Ustinov show up because he runs a gladiator school and needs to buy some slaves to fight people.
Yes, he is playing a character called Lentulus Batiatus, which is a real name recorded as the man who owned all of these slaves. And he examines their teeth as one would with a horse. He buys Spartacus after being told that Spartacus bit someone in the ankle.
It's fun to watch people buy people. Yeah, it's great. Like, yeah, watching him be like, let me look at their teeth. And I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah.
I want to be clear. It's not fun to watch people buy people.
They arrive at the school and we meet, I don't know if I would call him the overseer or the headmaster of this school, Marcellus, who I feel like some of Samuel L. Jackson's character in Django Unchained must have derived from this guy because he's a former slave, but he's clearly not on their side at all.
There's people in this movie who work the system, and we have varying degrees of sympathy for them, but he is not one that we have sympathy for. Also, interesting piece of trivia, Sam Jackson was the pseudonym that Dalton Trumbo worked under.
Oh.
Yes. Another, bringing it all back around. Watching people be entertained by two men fighting to the death does have some Django overtones.
So one of the things we talked about was that Peter Ustinov is kind of a magical creature, and we hadn't realized how wonderful he is because he is so engaging to watch in this, and the character that he's playing does some despicable things. We don't know if it's that Ustinov is so much fun to watch. Tell me about life at gladiator school.
It's essentially the NCAA. These guys, they train. They are promised that after several years, they may have a chance at having freedom or be able to work with other gladiators, should they so desire it, if they live. Most gladiators, they say, have about a 5 to 10 year lifespan, but they are treated very well. They are cared for. They are cleaned and washed. They are given access to women and rest.
There's some fantastic training montages in this. They're also wearing gratuitously short tunics and like underpant things. So you see a lot of muscular thighs and a lot of men's butts. And I couldn't make out whether this was about the gaze of the female audience or whether it was a homoerotic thing.
It's both, for sure. I would imagine this movie made a lot of supposedly straight dudes incredibly uncomfortable because there's a lot of 1950s fit looking dudes oiled up. I think they only have underwear on because of like decency laws. I don't think that they probably were actually wearing underwear.
The costumes in this, having just watched Cleopatra, Spartacus is what Cleopatra aspired to be. Everything looked like it was made of a fabric that came off an animal or out of a plant and could have been used in ancient Rome. We saw a lot of things that looked like rayon and polyester, and we described it as ancient Egypt via Branson, Missouri at the time. I appreciated the silly-looking sandals and boots that the actors had to carry off with dignity.
If you're a gladiator, you get a little wee ponytail to indicate that you are a gladiator. They look fairly silly, especially because Kirk Douglas gets this George C. Scott in Dr. Strangelove brush cut. And then he's got this wee little ponytail in the back.
This brings us to that scene from The Sopranos with Ralphie Saffaretto coked up, yelling, they didn't have flat tops in ancient Rome.
One thing that Kubrick does really well, where you see like clearly where he was flexing his creative muscle, he lays out this space really nicely, and you feel like you can geographically map within the compound where everything is. You see that it's not that big where they're training, and also get a lot of really great looks at the housing in which they live. And there's some really nicely composed shots. There's so many people in every shot, to go back to Cleopatra and pick on that movie fairly. There's a lot of standing around in that movie with the thousands of people who are around, which is an accomplishment in itself to get all of them to hold still. But in this, there's like a constant flow of humanity at all times. And it's very impressive to watch how well choreographed all of the movement is.
I appreciated how much longer the shots are in this than we see in modern editing. I appreciated having the space to linger in the shot and look at the actors. It increased the tension in the scene. Every shot was so beautifully composed. Of course you want to stay in it longer.
So we find out that in addition to being the drill master, Marcellus is also a panderer and brings some ladies. He brings Spartacus, Gene Simmons, is just like, try and make her look like a broken spirited slave. Good luck, everybody. She's so beautiful. Just cheekbones for days on this woman. They have an encounter. He says to her, I've never had a woman, because he's touching her. Like, how would you describe it?
Oh, he's touching her like he has never touched a stretch of female skin before. And hers is so beautiful.
Yeah. She's really well shot in this movie. He didn't have to volunteer that information. She was about to find out.
There are all sorts of things where I would chisel away on other films, but somehow it still comes together so perfectly, and I'm so swept by it. There are different acting styles coming together in this. Back then, when you made a big picture, like a motion picture of this size was meant to be for everybody. There were fans of Hollywood actors. There were fans of prestige actors. So you have a bunch of different actors with different acting styles all coming together and doing their thing, but the puzzle pieces somehow fit together.
I'm always struck by this movie, too, because the 60s were an era of big change in the film industry. This is a movie that has its feet planted in two very different worlds, and it's a wild ride to watch it because it has footing in that, like, that roadshow Bible movie. It has some of the trappings of that acting era, but it also has this incredibly transgressive screenplay that is about so much more than what it is about. And you have this filmmaker who demanded independence in his career and made, like, very specific movies that had a very uncompromised quality to them. It's a fascinating movie because it is like a Trojan horse of a roadshow movie that's like, oops, I'm actually telling you all of this stuff about the civil rights movement and about standing up to monsters and about the value of self-sacrifice in pursuit of a bigger thing and mission-driven protesting. And it's wild.
We go to ancient Rome and we're in the Senate, and welcome back to the show, Charles Laughton. This is 30 years after Private Life of Henry VIII. And I think it's great that we did that so recently because you can see how much filmmaking evolved in 27 years in between these. They've figured out so many things to do with the camera. Laughton is fantastic in this, and like he and Ustinov are the pragmatist characters, and they both kind of evolve dignity over the course of the film. I was disappointed to realize that Gracchus, the character played by Charles Laughton, isn't real. He may be an allusion to the Gracchi brothers, who lived about a couple generations earlier, and they were populist reformers. So Rome at the time is in a cycle that it did not get out of land ownership shifting from small farmers to oligarchs owning massive farms. There were efforts to redistribute the land, but it would always drift back to one person. What's going on in Rome in this move away from, we see the ways that the Republic was never perfect and that it is a struggle to keep it. But we're already at a point where people who had less were not emotionally invested in the idea of the Republic. There had been cases where individuals held positions such as the consulship more times they were supposed to, or closer together than they were supposed to. And I think all systems carry the eventual seeds of their demise in their birth and initial planning. It's just never clear at the beginning or even in the middle what those seeds are going to be.
You're kind of bumming me out here because I feel like you're laying something on me that I'm supposed to be picking up subtextually about what could be happening in my own world. But
you mean that people who struggle economically or perceive themselves as having lost status are not emotionally invested in the idea of the system and drift towards people who make them feel good about themselves? Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
But what was I think? Yeah, so the Gracchi brother, it's thought that like this character Gracchus is like a tribute to them because he's set up as the populist, and he's also sort of set up as someone who is better than Laurence Olivier's character Crassus in a like glass is 49% full versus glass is 20% full kind of way.
He's populist and intellectual, but also someone who has decades of experience being a politician, so knows how to like operate within a cynical system by sometimes occasionally having to be cynical himself. It's clear that they don't like each other and they're looking for ways to stick it to each other. And what's fun is that Charles Laughton and Laurence Olivier also didn't like each other at all in real life for reasons I couldn't get results on in a quick manner that satisfied my broken little brain. But we did speculate that it probably has a lot to do with them both being British theater artists who did a lot of directing and ran theater companies. If I had to buy a T-shirt at a store between the two of them, I am Team Charles Laughton. They were both right to dislike each other and probably didn't like each other for very stupid reasons.
We have another training montage, and then Laurence Olivier shows up at the training school. Crassus was the richest man in Rome, and he was pretty horrible. People working for him would find places where houses were burning down, and then would tell the owner, "We'll put out the fire if you will sell this house to us for way less than it's worth." They would go away and not put out the fire, or stories are different, or make it worse if the owner didn't sell them the house for far less than it was worth. But he is considered one of the wealthiest men who ever lived. Laurence Olivier shows up with, how are these two ladies related to him?
One is his wife and the other one is his daughter. He shows up with his daughter, who's about to be married to John Dahl.
This was crazy good casting. He looks like John Mulaney, and he's giving this major fail son energy. And just the way that he grins at things. Everyone in this is so good, but this was especially ingenious casting.
He has this Madison Avenue ad guy goes to Rome energy that's wild.
Yeah, he is playing a character named Glaberus, who has just been given a position due to nepotism. And he's marrying this woman, and they're there to see two gladiator fights to the death because they're very rich. And you see the ladies doing some heavy objectification of the gladiators. One of them is like, "Yeah, I like that black one." Looking at them like they are lunch and then planning to watch them die. It's really going out of its way to set you up to not want to identify with the people in the prettiest dresses.
This is also extraordinarily well shot. I loved this so much because they keep cutting back to show them having these nonsensical rich people conversations in the box where they're watching this. And that's all happening in the foreground. And then in the background, you see two men fighting each other to the death.
There was a comedic bit before this where Gladiatus realizes that Crassus is showing up and he's like, "Oh no, I have to cover my Gracchus bust." There's this bust of Charles Laughton where it's too heavy to move, and they put a blanket over it, which eventually Laurence Olivier knocks off. I think I'm going to have to cut myself saying everyone is so good in this 19 times.
I mean, everyone is so good in this.
John Mulaney Failson tries to grab Gene Simmons's butt. She spills some liquid on him in a way that seems like she didn't mean it. At some point, Simmons says that she was taken from Britain, and Rome is not going to invade Britain for another 22 or 18 years, whatever the difference between 73 BC and 55 BC is. And my brain hurts when I'm trying to count back on BC numbers, and I don't know how I ever passed the SAT. I don't know how she could have been taken as a slave from Britain when Caesar has not invaded yet. And I feel like they're doing this to justify the British accent, but everyone has a different accent in this movie anyway.
It's a real who cares. I mean, honestly, this is your logic line screenplay.
And she has a Latin name, Varinia. They don't need to do this. And Spartacus did have a wife. Plutarch in Parallel Lives writes, Spartacus's wife, a woman who came from the same tribe as Spartacus, was a prophetess who was possessed by ecstatic frenzies that were part of the worship of the god Dionysus. She declared that this was the sign of a tremendous and fearsome power that would bring him to an unfortunate end. She was living with him at the time and ran away with him when he escaped. So, no name for her. And in the Howard Fast novel, Varinia is more of a Xena warrior princess type, which I think they definitely toned back.
someone swung by, the streets of London and snatched up Eliza Doolittle and brought her to Rome to be a slave. And they felt like we needed that in this movie. Laurence Olivier wants to buy her. Also in here, Laurence Olivier buys himself a Tony Curtis doll.
A bunch of people holding up signs stand before them. And Tony Curtis is a fancy person slave where he knows the classics. He is there to tutor aristocratic children, to have lives of conversing about intellectual matters with other aristocratic children.
Laurence Olivier also makes it clear that another one of his jobs is to sexually pleasure him.
Before this, there is a fight because John Mulaney Failson, Laurence Olivier, and the two ladies who like looking at men in very short tunics want to watch two fights to the death. And it's so tense because you see the fight happening through a slat between boards as Kirk Douglas and the other guy are watching. And you really just come to hate these people because when Spartacus and Draba are having their fight, Draba wins. And you see this woman with her, and like, God, the aristocratic lady's hair is gorgeous in this. You see her give the thumbs down, and like watching gladiators fight to the death it was entertainment. They all like went out and watched it. You see there is a low value of human life, which makes it 100% okay when Draba throws his trident spear into a balcony with ladies in it.
Yep. He decides he's done with the fighting, and there's this sort of quality of a hope / acknowledgement of humanity that has started to infect this camp, which is obviously very bad.
For Peter Ustinov as a businessman, he agrees to this thing because Laurence Olivier offers him an ungodly amount of sesterces. This isn't how things are done. And it's not that Peter Ustinov is appreciating them as humans, where he's saying, like, it's not a good idea to have men from the same school fight each other for the first, this isn't a good idea. So many of them are trainees that he has not yet sent on to Rome from his school in Capua. And there's the idea that they'll fight people they don't know for the first fight.
He's a person who lives by a certain set of rules. That's a politicky move. I mean, it's also a smart move in terms of like protecting your investment in these men. Like having them fight each other is...
This is right. He wants to send them on to Rome to fight people they don't know first, where if they don't know the person, they're likelier to put in a bigger showier fight and garner more fame for him in his school. So, yes, Crassus, as a super rich person, is being disregardful of Batiatus as a somewhat rich, somewhat smaller businessman, which might be why Batiatus has a Gracchus bust in his house and not a Crassus one.
Life is worthless in this movie.
Yeah, I was saying that one of the things that makes Batiatus gradually more likable is they put him against Crassus, who's so much worse.
Yeah, there's an argument that he could make to sleep at night in a society like this, where he is saying, like, I am taking these men away from certain death and giving them the opportunity to experiencing something else.
And he's so funny. Like, his delivery is so good every single time. It's like he's not trying to be funny. He just...
Peter Ustinov is an actor who makes acting look very easy.
They
hang Draba's body for everyone to look at and witness after he is killed for trying to attack Crassus,
instead of killing Spartacus. And they hang his body upside down, and you just imagine like flies coming around this noble man. It's a slave rebellion. And Marcellus died. I feel like I've seen people die in movies before being drowned in soup, but it's so well done here. And I guess I was flashing back to that scene at the beginning of Lincoln where you see someone's head being stomped into the mud. That one is framed very tight, but this one was Yeah, it was very effective, and I enjoyed him dying in the soup because he was an asshole.
People are busy in the background of every shot of this sequence. It's so artfully composed that it doesn't feel like too much, but you get a sense of the scope of the violence of what's happening.
And everyone is delivering their lines hard. And then there is that famous scene with Tony Curtis in the pool that was cut and reconstructed, and the oysters versus snails dialogue.
Yeah. So this was cut from the original movie because even though the dialogue was vague and likely went over the top of most people's heads at the time, it's very pointed, and it's clearly like, you gonna suck my dick, dude? You gonna be cool about that? Because that's your job, is essentially what's being said. So they had to cut that. And in 1991, they did a restoration of many of the scenes that had been cut from the original film. And this was a scene they wanted to bring back. Tony Curtis was still alive, but Laurence Olivier was, of course, dead. His widow, the actress Joan Plowright, actually recommended that they reach out to Sir Anthony Hopkins, who trained with Olivier and apparently did a flawless imitation of him. And they re-recorded the dialogue with Anthony Hopkins playing Laurence Olivier in the scene, which is pretty cool. Meanwhile, Spartacus announces, because all of these slaves are enjoying tormenting the men who were free, who they've captured, and having a good time, he says, we're done doing that. We're not going to hurt anyone. We are going to rise up. We're going to lead an army to the sea to free them.
You see him rising to leadership challenges and raising his men above having vengeance on their minds and reaching this larger goal of freeing more slaves. There's a montage of building the army. If things look familiar here, it's because people imitated this.
Yes.
He runs into Varinia again, and I love how when he finds Gene Simmons, you see her moving her mouth rapidly to try to find words until she says them. Most of the time in movies, when they show people being deeply in love after relatively little contact, I have a hard time buying it. I love a meet cute, but I have a hard time with things where people are in love on not much contact. But in this case, I have no trouble believing that these people are in love, that they have rapport, and that when they finally have a bit of time together, where they aren't being furtive, that they're laughing together over things.
You don't get much more meet cute than like, oh, I'm going to be your concubine for the night while you are being held in captivity.
So yeah, this was not a meet cute at all. And there is another wonderful Ustinov and Laughton scene.
One of the things that Kubrick wanted, so this movie was an interesting mishmash of idealists. So you have Dalton Trumbo writing this movie with a very clear allegory to HUAC and the Red Scare of Hollywood. And then also Kubrick really wanted to drill down more into the cynicism of Roman politics. And then Kirk Douglas was passionately Zionist. So you have all these different conflicting mission-driven interpretations of this content, but there's these scenes like that scene, for example, that really shine where they're sort of talking about like being pragmatic.
I'm enjoying watching how actors who come from these different backgrounds and associations in film interact with each other from that. And, well, eventually Antoninus escapes, and Spartacus is asking him, what useful stuff can you do? And Antoninus is a very specialized kind of slave. He says, I can juggle.
I am a singer of songs. I do magic. I'm pretty sure I had a conversation with an army recruiter when they asked me what I could do. My army recruiting experience ended when I said that I was going to major in theater, and they're like, good luck. to you. And I was like, yeah, I think we're done here.
We have another training montage where Tony Curtis is doing his best, and then you see him performing for them. There's a thing where he does a magic trick that involves like a bird and an egg, and Spartacus gets yolk all over his face. If this happened to Crassus and anyone laughed, he would murder that person. Not only would he murder that person, he would murder all the people in the room who were too scared to laugh, and then he would murder their families. Spartacus is so lovable is because he laughs at himself. Real dignity in a leader is being able to laugh at yourself.
He also probably would have gone out and burned down all of those people's houses and bought them at a submarket rate.
I'm not saying Crassus started the fires. He just found houses that were burning.
It's always just the misfortune. Houses just catch.
Yeah, I mean, it's your own fault for why is your house flammable in the first place? And there are all these people that it goes back to. There's this one little old couple, and there's a scene with the recruitment where there's this little old lady where Spartacus is like, too many women, and this woman yells at him, "Where would you be, you lout, if some woman hadn't fought all the pains of hell to get you into this accursed world?" And she says, "I have made shrouds for 7 Roman masters." She is fierce.
The problem is, and this is starting to get back to the Roman, Spartacus is leading these people, and they're all of a sudden, they have hope, and they're having a good time, and they're smiling, and they're laughing, and their children are smiling and laughing, and there's this sensibility of like, oh, maybe we can have nice things.
They're hanging out on Mount Vesuvius, which is not going to go off for a bit yet. You see the money on the screen all the time, but there are things where, that's a painted backdrop. And you know what? I don't mind these painted backdrops. Whoever painted them did a really good job. And honestly, it's a nice change from CGI. I appreciate watching a thing where the fake stuff is at least real fake stuff.
Yeah, it's real fake stuff. As we've discussed, like, even though there's painted backgrounds, there's so much human capital on the screen, and there's so much going on all the time. There's a really good economy of storytelling happening, which is one of my favorite things to ever see in anything. Is like, you are getting little glimpses throughout this of the individuals who are part of this massive movement, and understanding little bits and pieces about who they are, and you feel their humanity. And one of the things that he and Gene Simmons bonded on initially when they were talking was this idea that they are human beings and they're not treated like that. The way that this movie evolves all of these individuals into people while also showing the scope of this crowd is really artfully executed.
So they make a bargain with a pirate guy to transport all of the slaves out of Italy, and everything's going fantastically. And Glaberus shows up. Glaberus should not be in this job in the first place. He got it because someone he knew got it for him, and he doesn't do a bunch of things you're supposed to do with a Roman camp because he's like, I'm fighting slaves. They're less than me. So they're like, why didn't you build a stockade? Why didn't you dig ditches? And he's like, it's slaves. Why bother? So they break his Roman standard, and he goes back to Rome in disgrace. And he's at the Senate, and Crassus points out how incompetent he is. And also, I think Laughton really brings it in this scene too.
This sequence is uncomfortable, and you see they keep catching these glances between Olivier and Laughton, and it's so fun to kind of imagine how mean they were to each other.
The John Mulaney fail son.
Yeah, fail son gets lapped out of Rome.
One of the things I'm noting here is that for all of this talk about why the Republic is falling apart and moving towards having an emperor and towards authoritarianism, we don't actually see common Romans.
No.
We don't actually see people who sold the family farm and then maybe something got redistributed to them at some point, but they had to sell it again. And at any rate, the husband has been in the army for 10 years, so there isn't anyone like working the land. We don't actually see these people who were losing emotional investment in the idea of the Republic. Once the Senate is still there as window dressing, but once the Republic is gone, the people who are nostalgic for it, it's sort of a thing of the educated class, of the elite, to be nostalgic for the Republic. It's noted in some of these sources that the poorer farmers were sympathetic to the slave rebellion.
We do see at the end of the movie, when they're all being marched as prisoners back into town, the people watching them come in on the side of the road are regarding them with dignity.
Because those are people who, like, a free person could wind up a slave. Laughton is for assigning Caesar to something. There's been this, like, back and forth of Caesar drifting between father figures, which we see in the bathhouse. We know that Laughton wants these slaves to be able to get on the pirate ships and leave, and that's how he's going to preserve peace in Rome. So it's a cynical judgment, but it's ultimately about preserving the peace, and he'll deal with the fallout of people getting messages of freedom later. And he said that he prefers chaos or corruption of the Republic to what Crassus is. And they both have this vision of restoring an idea of things as they were, but they have a different conception of what it is to be restored.
He's kind of like, if we let these people go, there will be some blowback on it, but not the same kind of blowback that we will get if we crush this rebellion and murder all of these people.
The slave army is receiving this hero's welcome at Metapontum. There's this bathhouse thing with the Crassus-Caesar, Crassus-Gracchus communications, and I would love to be a fly on the wall on set on the days where they had to film opposite each other.
So we're at a turning point now, because they have arrived at the sea, but the pirate guy that they were working with shows up again, and he's like, JK, there are no ships that will take you, because they got bought out by Crassus. Crassus has worked it out to have two armies coming at them and forcing them to go to Rome to fight Crassus and the Roman army.
Yeah, so the pirate tries to redeem. The pirate he's like, for a small fee, I can get you and again, Spartacus tells him, go away.
Yeah, Spartacus is not going to leave his soldiers.
From here on out, we're doomed, and we know it, and it throws us these beautiful moments of hope that we know are not going to mean anything. This is the turning point, and the armies are, and I'm so sure that Braveheart ripped off this scene of Crassus as general and Spartacus as general making rousing speeches to the crowd. Lentulus is back, and he wants to be the agent of the sale after the battle.
Working within the system, he is trying to do something that's profitable for him.
It's just that when you put him next to Crassus, he's human. So, like, what makes Ustinov so likable when he's playing a guy who trains men to fight each other to the death? And it's like he appreciates what they're doing as a craft, but he is a bottom feeder. And we see this character does go on a bit of a dignifying journey, and it's not like he deserves it. So what makes him so enjoyable?
It's a well-constructed character. Spartacus is practically like a Christ figure in this film, and Crassus is so bad. And in between it, you have Laughton and Ustinov trying to make decisions within a system that is a failure and trying to be moral relativists about it. He is the kind of character who ultimately is transformed by what he has experienced and then makes decisions based on that to just do one right thing.
Yeah, he does just do one right thing, and also he walks off with 2 million sesterces.
Yeah, but he's going to take that money and he's probably going to make sure that Gene Simmons gets over there safely.
But he might start another gladiator training school.
He might. But he is going to do this one right thing. And we ultimately can walk away from the film with hope for that character, that he has been transformed and that he has made permanent changes for himself. The character that he brings to this is one of joy. Like, he's having a good time. He's troubled in moments, but he's not necessarily uncomfortable with the choices he's making when we meet him, but he will be changed by it.
We go to this battle, which is gorgeously shot and heartbreaking because they're losing, and it's hard and it's awful. And there's a scene where someone's arm gets sliced off.
And that is a piece of restored film. They actually had a man who was an amputee in that role, and practical affected that into the movie.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. This battle scene is so bananas, and it feels like a really out and out Stanley Kubrick set piece to show the way that the Roman army set itself up for battle, and to see all of these aligned groups forming, and to show the contrast between the two. First, like, the sense of dread that it fills you with because it just keeps going.
Yeah. They have these tricks with smoke and thousands of extras. Spartacus was, if you go back to the sources, yeah, he's a brilliant strategist, and he's someone who did so much with nothing. What could someone with his capabilities have done had they not been a slave? There isn't anyone in his camp who's going to do what Matthew, Mark, and John do for Jesus.
And yeah, this sequence is, the lead up is agonizing.
We are at a point in this movie where everything is about to get really, really depressing. So we are going to have a quiz called, Would You Hook Up with This Ancient Roman?
Okay.
Based on their portrait bust or statue. And by hook up, we mean make out with. So I will read you the name. I will show you the bust if necessary from my computer, and you'll tell me. So Julius Caesar.
Based on what we saw in this movie, 100%. But I don't want to hook up with him if he resembles Rex Harrison.
So there are conflicting evidence with portrait busts, but there are portrait busts of him when he is old and when he is young.
He's either like Gavin Newsom or he is John Gielgud. Or in that one, he's a little Bill Murray. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to say yeah.
Next name, Lucius Cornelius Sulla.
Let me see the visual. What else do we know about him?
So he was that dictator that they're alluding to before, that everyone is like, do you want to bring back Sulla? While this is aiming to become worse than Sulla, to restore a very different idea than Gracchus has of what needs to be restored. So
may I ask one more question before I see the visual?
Yes.
Does he, or rather, did he think he was a god?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I brought up several images here. There are some that are like less faithful, because his statue, his portrait busts are missing a nose, but this is no nose and this is with nose.
Oh. I mean, without the nose, hard pass.
But it's not that he lost the nose, it's that his statue had a nose that someone broke off.
He's got like a little bit of like an Eric Bana thing happening, so yes, of course.
So this is not the best idea. He has a bit of a skank problem that would make me very worried. So I will read this to you about him. For a long time, he knew not that his bowels were ulcerated. This disease corrupted his whole flesh also, and converted it into worms, so that, although many were employed day and night in removing them, what they took away was nothing compared to the increase upon him, but all his clothing, baths, hand basins, and food were infected with that flux of corruption, so violent was its discharge. Therefore he immersed himself many times a day in water to cleanse and scour his person, but it was of no use, for the change gained upon him rapidly, and the swarm of vermin defied all purification.
Okay, you need to lead with this information next time. If you're going to show me a picture and ask me if I'm going to hook up with them, you also need to tell me if they are shedding worms.
Yes.
And I have a new thing that I'm going to wish on people. That's fun.
Yeah, this disease corrupted his flesh also and converted it into worms. Moving along, Pompey the Great.
No.
You haven't even looked at his bust.
I know, but I know he's a loser. So, I mean, show me his picture. There's sort of a wide-eyed sweetness there, isn't there? It's a bad haircut on some of those.
Yes, his eyes are really small.
His eyes are very small. I'm trying to think who he looks like. And I'm not coming up with it, but he's got like a prettiness to him.
I don't see that. I mean, I think he's rather plain.
Maybe it's just like the broad cheeks.
You know, you already said no, and then I showed you the bust. So
I'm not one back over.
The Emperor Titus.
He looked crazy.
His younger brother was crazy. I'm looking at this one where
he looks really derpy in that one.
He has such a derpy nose here. So Titus, he's really mean to the Jews.
Oh, well then no, I don't want anything to do.
Like if you look at that Arch of Titus, that sculpture where it shows people carrying back our menorah that they stole from Judea.
I don't like that.
Titus and his dad Vespasian, super mean to the Jews.
Okay, no.
Okay. The Emperor Nero.
I feel like Nero is probably a no, but show me. He was also kind of a trifling piece of shit, right? Oh, yeah.
Neckbeard not doing it for you?
It's like a neckbeard connected to his whole head of hair. What is happening? He looks like the last thing you see at a frat party when someone hands you a drink.
He killed his mother and his wife and a lot of people, and he's the one with that...
The fiddle.
Yeah, the fiddle, and making everyone watch his bad acting and bad singing.
Oh my God. This just keeps getting worse.
Antinous.
He had boy band hair.
He looks a lot like Elvis.
I don't know if I want to hook up with him or if I just want hair that does that. Look at those curls.
So do you know what he's known for?
No.
He is the Emperor Hadrian's boyfriend. Much younger boyfriend. He's not interested in hooking up with us.
Oh, well then I definitely want to date him. Or my 18-year-old self does.
Yeah. Also,
he's not interested in women. I'm like, yeah.
Caligula.
No.
All right. So I guess that was our quiz.
Okay.
Back to really depressing stuff happening to characters we cared about.
The battle doesn't go well.
No, and there are so many dead bodies everywhere, and we see the dead bodies of the adorable old couple and the little person and all of these people where we had just seen them in flashes through these scenes, but it feels like we know them, and Kubrick has won the game on... I often feel like directors and scriptwriters play a game where they're like, how little, like the ratio of information and time that you get with a character to can you make the audience cry when they die?
Yeah, he nails it here. This is some economical storytelling in terms of bringing you around to these people's side, and it's a huge bummer. This is what happens when people start to feel hope.
And it's crushed.
Yeah.
And then we have the I'm Spartacus scene. I always think of that as the last scene in the movie, and it isn't. There's a lot more movie to go after that.
I described this to you as it is the Handel's Messiah Hallelujah chorus of filmmaking. We have 30 more minutes of movie for you.
They aren't going to say, oh, we can't kill all of you. They don't want to go back to being slaves. Like, it never seems to occur to them. We're really not offering any carrot here. There's this pause where they're expecting the slave army to cheer, like, yay, we get to live. And silence.
It's very much like in Joan of Arc when they're like, hey, you can live, but you're going to live in this cell until you die.
So Peter Ustinov has shown up. Laurence, Olivier, he is obsessed with finding Spartacus. And I think it's that Spartacus is what he wishes he was, someone people gravitated toward, as opposed to someone people hate and fear who has to buy everything. But it's pointed out, like, he met Spartacus and didn't remember him. He finds Varinia, and it's like, wow, they try to make her look bad by showing her immediately postpartum with circles under her eyes and mud in her hair. And all the mud does is highlight how lustrous the rest of her hair is.
Yeah.
And how perfect her skin is.
Did she give birth during the battle?
I think she gives birth during the battle.
A war will bring on labor, I suppose.
I wonder if she even had anyone helping her, because it seemed like they killed women, too. He orders Batiatus whipped, and I think this is like a turning point where that character becomes sympathetic. We see him back in Rome, where he's hanging out with Charles Laughton, and they're sponging off his back, and he's saying he was, like, whipped. They both develop dignity. They're still pragmatists. If you think of yourself as a regular person, this is about as much of an arc as you hope for, because everyone says, I'm Spartacus, but none of us is capable of being Spartacus.
It does also point out to Olivier, too, that, like, it's something that he will never have. And he says this later to Caesar, and Olivier does a good job in this movie of conveying this as well. He's never going to be a movement. Like, he's never going to be bigger than his own name, which Spartacus is. Like, he's inspired people to attach themselves to a movement, which you can't get people to do in cynicism.
And everyone knows he lost. He held out for a couple years, and then he lost. Olivier is trying to make Varinia fall in love with him. It is not working, and he wants her because she's Spartacus's woman.
We also see that the punishment for all of these survivors who will not give up Spartacus is just a nice, cool, like, being crucified on the side of the road in the roads lining the way back to Rome. It seems like it's a really inconvenient way to kill people.
The landscape that we've seen, it all looks like brush. I don't see a lot of tall, straight trees that you could drive these telephone pole-sized crucifixes from to nail the people up to. You have to build the thing. You have to hoist the person. You have to drive it into the ground so that it stays there.
Yeah, you either have to hoist the person up or you have to lay them out on the cross while it's on the ground, hammer them in, everything like that. And then a couple, you have to lean it up.
I'm assuming that they're just having the slaves put in all this work as they're moving. They must have either had to bring imported logs for a mass crucifixion, or then they have to do this 6,000 times.
Yeah.
And you really don't have an emotionally invested labor force here.
It seems like a labor-intensive and inconvenient way to do so.
I'm not pointing this out as a film choice on Kubrick's part,
no,
more as a dumb choice on the part of the Romans.
It just seems inefficient. If you're going to shut down a movement, you need to do it with more efficiency. We saw how they shut down Occupy Wall Street. You clear the square, you get rid of everyone. I don't understand. This is a grand way to send a message. It's just not convenient.
Well, they crucify them all the way back to Rome. And I don't know who they think they're sending a message to or about what, because it's not all the people, like we see later, the people that see them along the road aren't like, yeah, Crassus is great. They're like commoners and everything. It also doesn't seem to do diddly squat to get the Roman commoners to say, hey, we need to reinvest in the Republic, but make it about us this time. Let's not start gravitating towards autocratic strongmen. Doesn't happen.
No,
it's all just a bummer, man.
It's just it is something that like an autocrat loves to make to depress the spirits of people, and I think like there's no better way than to make like your drive into Rome pretty miserable with the odor of decaying flesh, in the bodies of slaves who dared to just like be like, hey, we're just gonna walk to the sea and get on boats and leave. They get back to Rome and Olivier spots the Tony Curtis doll that he tried to buy himself earlier and is like, oh, we have special plans for you. He doesn't quite dope out that Kirk Douglas is Spartacus, but he senses there's something up there. because he makes him go back with Tony Curtis as well. And he's like, you two are going to fight each other for our entertainment value, which we're back to that. Tony Curtis and Kirk Douglas are fighting over who is going to kill the other one, because crucifixion is a terrible way to die, as we all know from Jesus Christ Superstar.
I guess they don't have time to talk this out. It's quite easy for one of them, after a mortal wound, to still be able to stab the other.
Yes, we learned about that at the beginning in their fight training. We saw the different places. You'd think they would have paid that off. I'm a little disappointed they didn't, now that I think about it. But it is interesting that they never paid that off.
Maybe it's in there as a red herring.
Could be. It's also a big who cares. If they both died right there, then Spartacus wouldn't get to see his baby.
His baby who is from... There are 3 different
his baby in all of his baby's different forms.
And it's at least 3 different babies of not even the precise same size and shape. The skin color is relatively the same, but I feel like this is why you need more women on set to match babies better.
Knowing how long it takes Kubrick to make a movie in the best of times, I could see a world where they needed a bunch of backup babies, because by the time they got that shot set up, they're like, we got to get this done because this baby's got a clock on them, because babies are good for like an hour,
maybe, before the baby gets less cute.
So they fight, and he cries over Tony Curtis, because Tony Curtis was like a son to him and brought so much to the army with his juggling.
But also in here, there is Olivier reading Laughton the riot act, and Laughton has this look on his face of... How would you describe the look on his face?
It's disdain.
Disdain. Yeah, it's not heartbreak, it's disdain, it's disgust. And you see him back at his mansion just setting things up. He gives Bacchiatus the 2 million sesterces and tells him to get out of there with Varinia. I'm not sure like how he gets Varinia. I think he sends him after her.
Through a series of events, he now has Varinia with him. A bunch of stuff happened that we don't necessarily need to worry ourselves with.
Like, Crassus is cracking down on everything. There's this one point where Kirk Douglas says he'll come back as millions, but Rome doesn't fall because the populace, Rome falls because what we see happening keeps exacerbating, and eventually it isn't a freedom thing. It's that barbarians show up, and then a lot of really gorgeous buildings that I wish were still there are gone.
But Ustinov and Laughton decide to take one positive, decisive action of true decency, which is they make sure that Varinia is able to escape Rome with her and Spartacus's metamorphosizing baby. They take one really good action and one defiant action, and then Laughton kills himself.
And there's this touch here that I loved, which was that after he sends them off, and he has this satisfying moment where Gene Simmons kisses him on the head, and he says, like, wow, Crassus would be so jealous. And you see him, like, taking personal satisfaction. You see him basically skip up the steps with this, like, lightness in his step to go kill himself. Like, let's get it done. There's energy to him heading into his suicide. They believed that suicide was a noble thing that was entirely permissible as an out.
The role of death in this film is interesting in its way of, like, being salvation.
You see that when Gene Simmons sees him on the road, where you see her saying, please, please die.
Yeah. Because they do get out.
She wants him out of his pain. Anyway, it is one of those, movie coincidence that when they're on the road out of Rome, and he's saying, this is my sister, we have and it feels like they are so lucky to just get past this and out of Rome.
Yeah.
So maybe it does make sense that if Spartacus is the last body that they crucified on the road back to Rome, he'd be pretty easy for into on the way in. We've heard all roads lead to Rome, but we don't know what their options are. And you know what? This isn't as coincidental as I wanted to point out. He isn't going to smile up there, but there is the sense that he does die happy because he knows that his wife and his son are free.
Yeah, and they're going to, in theory, go have a better life.
In Aquitania, wherever that is.
With Peter Ustinov, who is a heck of a good storyteller.
I had forgotten up to now, but we have corpse capers this week.
Capers!
So, as I said in our intro, Crassus sucks. So, Crassus keeps on being a big bad oligarch and doing lots of rotten, sucky things until he eventually leads an army into Parthia, which overlaps what we know as Iran. He loses a battle, embarrassingly. He gets away, but is killed in a dispute over a horse. And then his head and hands are delivered to the opposing guy in terms of our corpse capers. And I am reading this from Crassus the First Tycoon by Peter Stothard. When historians began to write the story of Crassus's catastrophe, some added that his open mouth, shriveled by desert air, had been filled with molten gold as testament to his lifetime of greed, and that when Silesius brought his gift to the king, the barbarian court was watching a performance of Euripides' last tragedy, the Bacchae, and that Crassus's head became a stage prop at the end of the show.
Want it to be so real.
I know.
It's so artful and so impossible.
I know. It seems too perfect.
So, what a movie.
What a movie.
Do you have any choice dialogue?
I have a bunch of choice dialogue this week, Sarah. I have over 10 lines here. Starting with, hamstrung, marvelous, I wish I'd been there, and may fortune smile upon most of you. I'm not an animal. Sweet, merciful, blood-stained gods. One of the disadvantages of being a patrician is that occasionally you're obliged to act like one. My taste includes both snails and oysters. Where would you be, you lout, if some woman hadn't fought all the pains of hell to get you into this accursed world? I have made shrouds for 7 Roman masters. Maybe there's no peace in this world for us or anyone else. Yes, indeed, that sounds like an attack of dignity. He'll come back and he'll be millions.
I do love for those about to die, we salute you.
That's not from the script. That's what they said. You hear it in a lot of movies that are said.
I understand that. I just liked it. That's it. Every piece of dialogue in this film is, Dalton Trumbo is a genius. It's all very artfully delivered. I have no complaints about this screenplay. And the dialogue is wonderful. It's a rich tapestry.
It's all quotable, yet unpretentious and in character.
What a miserable existence this time period was.
Unless you are a patrician. So with that, Sarah, let's get into scoring this thing. Can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
Yes, we rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to specific issues particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. With that out of the way, let's score this thing.
For outward appearances, makeup, and hair, I gave it a 7.5. For acting and casting, I gave it a 10. For passage of time, I gave it a 10. For costuming, I gave it a 9.75 with the dinging because there was just too much of men's butts. For quality of the script, I gave it a 10. For accuracy, I gave it a 2. For storytelling, I gave it a 10. For production value, I gave it a 10. For production direction decision-making, I gave it a 10. And for do we care, I gave it a 10. I gave more 10s than I have given any other film, but because of that accuracy thing, it came out to 8.825. So I am using the buy because it's Spartacus.
Fair.
which brings me to 9.825.
Okay. So my scores: outward appearance, makeup and hair, I gave a 7. Acting and casting, 8. Passage of time, 4. Costuming, 7. Quality of the script, 9. Accuracy, 3. Storytelling, 8. Production value, 10. Production and direction decision making, 9. Do we care? 5.
Really?
Yeah.
I cared a lot about whether they got out of Rome.
Maybe just because I was like, yeah, I know what happens.
And I feel like I was being constantly overgenerous on the grounds of it being Spartacus, because I don't think Lincoln is better than Spartacus, and we gave that a 10.
Lincoln's better than Spartacus.
You think so?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what's your average?
My average is...
Like, I started to feel like the flaw here is that, yeah, something being inaccurate if it's a biopic does, if you care a lot about the subject.
7.0.
Your average is 7.0.
Yes. Spartacus is a classic, but there's flaws in terms of he's a little too perfect. The fact that Spartacus to me is not the most interesting character in a movie called Spartacus is a flaw.
I was way too nice because it's Spartacus.
It's an entertaining, rousing movie. I enjoyed it immensely watching it.
Spartacus, your score comes to 8.4125.
All right.
So Sarah's actually deducting for the things that I was way too gentle about because I had too much reverence for its Spartacus, and my having too much generosity actually balanced out to roughly a fair score. Congratulations, Spartacus. You earned second opinion.
Second opinion is the element we have stolen blatantly from the podcast, How Did This Get Made?
Yes. So the prize for scoring above an 8 or below a 4 is that you get to hear us read IMDb reviews of 1 or 10 stars or thereabouts from people who disagreed with our assessment of the film. So there are 3 reviews here. I will start with the final one.
Okay. Can I do this the first?
Yes, I was saving that one for you. So this is 2 stars out of 10. Holy, with holy spelled Holly, not WHOLLY. Wholly overrated with over hyphenated to rated. Written by Embley on May 26th of 2000. Are you ready for it?
Uh-huh.
I thought for some reason that I would find this film interesting, if not entertaining. As it was, I just found it boring. It was next to impossible to stay awake through it. There were a few scenes that were amusing only because of the overly dramatic quality. I guess it is a good film to have watched, but I don't get why everyone loves it so much. Kirk Douglas was so much better in Paths of Glory.
Why even bother writing this? I don't know. I don't know if I have a bigger problem on the IMDb of the people who think that they are film critics or the people who think that this Facebook comment here about the movie Spartacus merited an entire review.
Well, it's also, I guess it is a good film to have watched.
This seems like a padded out close, like that you would give to an essay that you're like, I need to get this to 1,000 words and I have 980. I guess it is a good film to have watched. Who amongst us hasn't closed a book report that way if they just need to pad it out? But that said, like, why bother?
Let's get into the meat of the thing. This 1-star review entitled, well, take it away, Sarah.
Okay, this review by Fugu_286. Suckiest movie that ever sucked, followed by at least 10 exclamation points and 4 ones.
Yes, and they wrote this on Oh my gosh, so close. It is almost the 20th anniversary of Fugu_286 writing this review, because the date on here is December 26th, 2004.
Do you think the writer of this is going to go back and celebrate the day you wrote this review this year on Christmas?
Boxing Day.
I want to know about this name. Ralph Ziffaretti. Do we think that's who Fugu 286 is?
No, that's a character on The Sopranos.
Oh, you mentioned that, yeah.
At the beginning, who's the one who gets coked up and yells at the TV they didn't have flat tops in ancient Rome. But I think they got the name wrong. That character's name is actually Ralph Cifaretto. They spelled the character's name wrong, in addition to following a ton of exclamation points with 4 ones.
Ralph Ziffaretti / Cifaretto. They didn't have flat tops in ancient Rome, exclamation points and a 1. That's just one of many, many things wrong with this silly 1960 movie that the great Stanley Kubrick attached his name to. So let's make a list, huh? Spartacus was not a white man. He was most likely a dark-haired, olive-skinned Slav. See the A&E miniseries to see how Spartacus should have been cast. The gladiator from the Bronx. Yo, Spartacus. Enough said. The slaves taking on all of ancient Rome. If you watch the Hollywood version, you would think the Roman armies were incompetent clods who were mowed down by a ragtag group of slaves. Wrong. The slave revolt, while initially successful, withered in the face of the Roman military. They did not take on 6 legions and beat each and every single one of them. That never happened. They did not have flat tops in ancient... Wait, I mentioned that already. The gladiator combat was all wrong. Spartacus was not crucified. Nobody knows exactly what happened to him, but he was most likely killed in the battle against Crassus. Laurence Olivier sucked. 3 exclamation points and a 1. There you go.
Laurence Olivier did not suck. He was a villain, but I saw when he was looking at Gene Simmons' eyes, there was this vulnerability in his face. Like, he really played that character 3-dimensionally. You felt that everything was coming out of this place of fear.
Olivier had some moments at the end that weren't great. Like, if you've seen the Neil Diamond Jazz Singer, not great. Clash of the Titans, I do not think he was all that great in that, but he's not ever a bad actor. Sometimes he just seemed tired and maybe a little bored. I have so many problems with this review. First of all, it's yelling at me.
Yes, there is rampant use of all caps. This seems like it was written by a person who abused some substances and then wrote an IMDb review.
It feels like it's written in the voice of a character from Entourage. Someone's like, I'm going to do some high-level performance art and I'm going to pretend to be E from Entourage and write reviews on the internet. I find some of these interpretations of the events of the film really interesting. The slaves taking on all of ancient Rome. They did not do that. They failed.
Well,
they were not successful. The Roman armies were incompetent clods who were mowed down by a ragtag group of slaves. No, that's not what happened. The slaves lost in a very significant way. I feel like this person is upset and they're making a point, but they also didn't. Let me also be clear about this. I literally don't care about what kind of hairstyles they had in ancient Rome. I'm just saying that if this is his evidence, is a quote from The Sopranos, my evidence of saying, well, you actually don't know that to be true, you weren't there, it is just as good.
Okay. So there is one more.
Yes.
That I was hoping you could read to me.
Of course.
And this is a more recent review called A Lesson on How to Miscast a Movie, written by I.C. Menindi on August 29th of 2023.
I've watched this film 3 times in my life. I keep trying to understand why anyone would enjoy the finished product. I can only reason 3 aspects of the film that are appealing. 1, most of the supporting actors were great, including Olivier and Simmons. 2, cinematography. 3, set design. So why do I rate this film a 1 out of 10? Lousy acting and miscast, quote, actors Kirk Douglas and Tony Curtis. They are so miscast, you'd think you are watching a satire of some other movie. Reminds me of a Carol Burnett sketch, except she did it better. I can only guess that with all the millions spent on the production, they couldn't afford a dialect coach, or maybe they knew it was a lost cause, so we painfully hear Douglas do this hammy shit speech pattern and Curtis's Brooklyn accent in 25 or so BC. They are both such poor actors, they can't pull it off, and they make the entire movie ridiculous. Was Douglas such an egotist? He didn't think his 1960s supercut hairdo wouldn't look as ridiculous as his, quote, performance? They ruined this movie, in my opinion. My rating of 1 was a sympathy vote for the other actors and their efforts to hold back their laughter and embarrassment at its premiere. Ridiculous.
They spell it with red and they have it in caps. What do you make of this?
Okay, if you hate this movie, don't watch it 3 times.
And they've noted 3 things that were remarkable about it. Great supporting actors. The cinematography in this is remarkable, in fact. And the set design is, too. This is a very uneven review. This feels like a 4 review, not a 1 review.
Yeah.
They have too many nice things to say.
It's putting an awful lot of weight on 2 performances in this film.
And I thought Douglas had a lot to carry playing this character who's set up as super heroic.
I'm going to say something controversial here. I guess, we don't actually know what people talked like, but none of them talked like anybody in this movie. It was ancient Rome. Nobody had a British accent or an American accent or a Brooklyn accent or anything. So who cares?
Well, also, but Rome was the center of the world, so there would have been people who, by or against their will, were speaking Latin as a second or third language and would actually have had a variety of accents, not the ones we heard, but also we wouldn't have understood them anyway because we don't speak Latin.
Gonna make another maybe controversial statement that I'll probably walk back in a week. I don't necessarily think that accent work equals good acting or good performance. I would much rather see Kirk Douglas speaking like Kirk Douglas, giving a performance like he gives in this movie or any given other movie that he is in, because he's a uniformly excellent, watchable actor. I'd much rather hear him talk the way Kirk Douglas talks and give a full-throated performance that feels like he read the script and was super invested in the finished product than see him try and struggle around keeping an accent consistent.
What does the Thracian accent sound like? Should he be speaking with a Turkish accent in English? I was annoyed by this haircut myself, but I'm beginning to become annoyed at all the people who take such an exception to this haircut that they let it cloud out the rest of the film.
There's a lot of haircuts in this movie that defy.
Gene Simmons has too much bangs going on. Half her head is cut into big bangs, and then part of it is really long. And that didn't make sense, but she can get away with anything.
I speculate that Gene Simmons had short hair and they taped a ponytail in the back of her head.
That makes sense.
She calls him an egotist in here. Find me the actor who isn't, especially if you're producing your own stuff. At that point, you do have a certain view of your skills. Kirk Douglas also was invested in making good product. Later in life, when the opportunity finally came together to make One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a property that Kirk Douglas owned for years, he recognized he could not play Randall Patrick McMurphy anymore, and he gave it to his son to produce.
That's amazing.
So he's maybe overblown his role in Dalton Trumbo's comeback and things like that, and kind of told a certain version of that story that Dalton Trumbo's family disputes elements of. He's painted as a hero in his memoirs, but he did ultimately use the power of his name and his influence to help end the Blacklist. I don't think that he would have been in this movie if he didn't feel confident in his ability to carry the part, and if the studio didn't feel confident in that. So I don't feel like this is an ego-driven performance, and I do think that he probably would have pulled himself out of it if it were.
Yeah, and another one, I feel like we haven't mentioned the lighting enough. There's one particular aspect of the lighting that just came to mind that I wanted to make sure I mentioned before we closed, which is the way that they light the dimple in Kirk Douglas's chin. It's almost as if they put white makeup, but there's this constant circle of white light around the chin dimple on his chin throughout the film.
I'm going to defend the rich movie star here bravely and just say that I think when you're that powerful and you can open a movie and you have the ability to bring people along and to protect them from the kind of scrutiny that could do them harm, is, as is the case here with Dalton Trumbo. Maybe you're not always the greatest actor, but you're a good actor. I don't have a problem with the accents. I don't care. I think he's a good actor without it. As I mentioned, I did compare Tony Curtis to Jared Leto because I do feel like he's kind of like a pretty boy who's a little nuts, but he's also fine in this. Who cares? Who cares?
It's Spartacus. Not I'm Spartacus. It's Spartacus.
Happy end of the year. What a year it's been.
It's been too much year.
It has been. It has been.
We closed on a movie about a slave rebellion that ends with thousands of people being crucified, and that we remarked on as hopeful for one scene of everyone going to their death with a bit more enthusiasm. I don't know why that struck me as ending the year on a hopeful note or a note of unity. And we are ending the year on a note of unity in the face of despair.
One thing, like, this movie shows that even with the victory, Laurence Olivier is empty. He sees it, and we get to see that. And, tyrants, Gandhi taught us, they always fall.
Or they have their dried out open mouth filled with gold and then are used as a stage prop.
I've got hashtag vision board things from this episode. So, other stuff you should watch instead, just watch Spartacus.
Yeah, just watch Spartacus. If you want other fictionalized things, I do love Robert Graves's I, Claudius. I think it's actually pretty rare that the best thing we can recommend is the film we just sat through.
Yeah.
I don't know if did we even do that for Lincoln?
Watch Spartacus. Feel some hope. I'll take us out here. So if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. And our Instagram handle is at Biopic a Podcast Story. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see our official episode ratings for all the movies that we've done so far. We are also now on Blue Sky at biopic-podcast.bluesky.social. We'll also link to that in the show notes. If you want to email us, you can get in touch at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Radioactive.
Radioactive!
Which is the story of Marie Curie. It was directed by Marjane Satrapi. I have all of her graphic novels in French, and that's what I use to try to get my French back into shape. She's also been very active in the woman life freedom movement for restore human rights for the women of Iran, which is
It's a project.
also it's where Crassus died.
Got his mouth filled with gold and had his head used as a prop in a play.
I want that to be true.
Do too.
All right.
Hooray. Okay. Have a great night, great week, great month, great new year.
Yeah. Happy 2025. And thank you for listening to us.